Hello and welcome to this week's Property Matters, the show that brings global trends to an Irish audience to help shape your knowledge of the industry. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Your hosts for today are Gavin Gallagher, sitting in for Bryan Fox, and myself, Carol Tallon.
Thank you, Carol. I'm delighted to be co-hosting Property Matters once again this week. We have a very exciting lineup ahead with some amazing guests that we hope we will show a different side of the property market. But first, let's have a look at some of the big headline stories this week. First of all, the Irish Times this week reports that Dublin house prices are now more than 9 times the average salary, while strangely the Irish Examiner published an even grimmer interpretation of the data, suggesting that it's actually 14 times the average salary. We have a story in The Independent, and they describe, like the Hunger Games, this is how the Independent describes dozens of people sleeping overnight in their cars in an attempt to buy houses in Cork. And then finally we have, and looking west, the Connacht Tribunal reports that councillors declare housing emergency.
Okay, and on to some commercial news. Dublin-listed property investment firm Dublin REIT, with a portfolio worth 1.5 billion, is up for sale. Now, the Irish Times reported that Dublin rents are likely to rise 17% by 2021 due to lack of supply, and the pace of construction activity growth slows in March.
Well, hopefully our guests will be able to make sense of some of the big market issues, or maybe we will uncover a few more.
Okay, so our first guest in studio with us today is John O'Connor, Chief Executive of the Housing Agency. John, you're very welcome to Property Matters today. And thank you so much for joining us. So we've heard there in the headlines that there's certainly some grim news coming out. First of all, people queuing in their cars overnight. What do you make of it when you read that kind of headline, John?
Well, it's a clear indicator in terms of having to get housing supply right. We need enough houses for people to buy or to rent. So clearly in the Cork situation there, that because of maybe the lack of supply, there's a very big demand when housing becomes available for sale.
But is it just a numbers thing? Because I mean, you mentioned there we have to get the supply right. The supply right, it isn't just about the numbers, is it? No,
it's a supply right at the right price. One of the main aims from the housing agency's point of view is to focus on affordability. We want housing that is affordable for people to buy or to rent, and housing costs, relative to income, are still a major issue, and rents, in many parts of the country are just too high at the moment.
Yeah, that's certainly true, and in fact, your own agency launched or facilitate the launch of the Vienna model here in Dublin. That's been on exhibition, and we've spoken about it here over the last number of weeks on the show. And I think it was interesting when you had delegates over from Austria and other parts of Europe, and one speaker in particular noted, and it was quite stark, that this current generation, that essentially they're one of the first generations that aren't in a position to rent or buy the homes that their parents would have built only a generation ago.
Yes, I mean, what's seen, both in Ireland and other parts of Europe and other parts of the world, is that housing costs, both buying and renting, has been increasing, significantly, and it is making it much more difficult for younger generations. And trying to identify the underlying issue. The underlying issue seems to be the cost of land, and the funding from banks in terms of land. That's a huge issue.
Yeah, I'm actually coming from a house building family and third generation, so I know something about all this kind of stuff, and it's quite difficult to. I mean, the house prices, the prices that are out there are set by the market, and the land is valued based on a residual valuation from the prices that you can actually sell them for. It kind of breaks back to that. But it's also, I think, something to do with the amount of people that left Ireland during the recession, that we haven't actually recovered from that, from the point of view of capability of building the volume that we need to build to kind of like replace the lost. I think we were doing 80,000 units a year back in 2007, and I think what are we at now? 16,000 last year or something like that, and we need is it 25,000 or something like that?
I think the CIF put the figures for output this year at for 2018 at I think 18,000.
Yes,
is that correct?
Yes,
and then rising up to 2021 is the
yes, that's a prediction for this year. Yeah, just coming on two issues there. One in terms of the amount of people employed in the construction sector. That is an issue in terms of not having sufficient tradesmen, sufficient architects and engineers, to deliver the housing that we need and do the development. Actually, at the moment we are looking at that Vienna model, and one thing is very striking in Austria is they have kept a constant level of people employed in the construction industry for the last 50 years.
Really?
Plus or minus 5%. And
that would be booking global trends for the construction industry, wouldn't it?
It would be, yes. And the essential part how they manage that is they keep a constant level of supply of housing, because they provide 40% of their housing as low-cost rental housing. They have this model of cost rental housing, secure long-term housing for people, and keeping that constant supply of housing makes such a difference, and gives affordability as well, and it makes everything work in the construction sector. Okay,
so would I be right in thinking then that under this Vienna model, there isn't the same cyclical nature of a boom bust, like, for example, we would see in Ireland, or that any market is seeing in terms of cycles?
Yes, the essence of the what's called the Vienna model is this supply of what's called cost rental housing, where the costs of the rents are based on the cost of revision and managing of the properties. And because it's not related to the market, they're supplying housing based on the needs of their population, and the rents are reasonable rents. They'll be 600, 700 euro per month rents, and because they're supplying into what's needed, they can keep that constant supply of housing going. So that they're not looking at house prices or market rents or anything. They're just supplying what people need
based on predictions of population growth and things like that.
Yes, it works extremely well, and because they've been doing it for so long now, they just keep it going, and it is very striking.
Is it like funded by the private sector, or is that like partially funded by the public sector?
Each development actually nearly funds itself, and the way it works is that they might borrow half the costs from the bank, just normal bank borrowing, but because of the certainty they can get that at a very low interest rate, the local authority provide lending at a good rate on a long term, and actually the tenant actually puts up a 5% deposit in relation to the building of the rental apartments.
These are for the equivalent of social and affordable.
Yes, equivalent. It would be people maybe earning between, or anything up to 75,000 euro, per annum. In very, very specifically in Vienna, it's a net income for a single person of 44,000, or for a couple 66,000. That's net income, and that group can rent and readily within a year get rental accommodation, but they are encouraged actually to save up their 5% deposit over a number of years. The state they top up like our SSIA scheme that we had a number of years ago here, and some of the money that has been built up in the local authority or the housing association is also used to provide equity. But it's mainly
is a good level. Yeah. I mean, compared to our market, like 20%, nobody can afford that. It's. I mean, people are paying so much in rent. How could they accumulate 20% deposit for anything, you know.
Yeah, and it's particularly difficult. We talk about kind of first-time buyers have to come up with a 10% deposit, but somebody buying a second home now, the 20%, as you say, Gavin,
it's impossible.
It's extremely difficult, and that is one issue for our housing at the moment, is that if somebody's buying a second home or moving or needing to have a larger home, that to come up with 20% deposit is extremely difficult.
It's completely prohibitive.
And the banks are very difficult as well. I mean, bridging finance and stuff like that, you know, they've gone from the loose kind of money times of the 2007s and stuff like that to the complete opposite, polar opposite, so that it takes months to kind of organise anything, and there's so many costs associated with it, because they hire different sets of lawyers. In the past, you know, the bank would assume that your lawyer would cover, you know, what they need, but there's additional lawyers required and all of this kind of stuff. It just adds so much time and expense to it, which has to be paid by the person who's buying the house.
Yeah, it actually opens up a question that actually was raised at a panel discussion that both myself and John were at a couple of weeks ago, and there was also a private developer there, Michael O'Flynn from O'Flynn Group, and one of the conversations that came up was around the central bank, the macroprudential rules, and whether the exceptions or the exemptions, should they be commonplace? So, for example, are we pitching our lending at 3.5 times salary? Is that too low? Ought it be 4.5 times? And you know, look,
well, it's very low. I've spoke to somebody, a friend was actually looking at a house to buy in a development that I actually happened to have a brochure, and we were looking, and it wasn't an expensive house, and it was about sort of 310 or 320,000 or something kind of in that ballpark, and this lady was, I think she was probably earning about 60,000 a year, and she wouldn't qualify for the actual payments, and so even though she'd have enough money to pay it, she wouldn't actually qualify for the loan because of her salary versus the price of the house.
Is she renting at the moment?
She's renting at the moment.
And probably paying more than the mortgage would be.
The mortgage would be substantially below what she pays in rent, yeah.
See, this is where the affordability question comes up. John, I might just get you to explain for people who aren't familiar, because there's been a lot of talk about the cost rental model, but I'm not sure it's completely understood. So will you just take a moment to explain to people what that is?
Okay, what the cost rental model is where you build housing or apartments, and the rents is going to be charged on the cost of providing that accommodation. Nothing to do with market rent. Typically, in other countries such as Austria, also in Denmark and Netherlands and other countries, the land is provided at low cost. You know, often
is it by the government itself?
By the government, or they control the price of private land. You know, the land is provided at a reasonable cost, and then very importantly, low cost long-term funding is provided. It's in effect often funding that's provided over 50 years, so they can get the cost of providing the housing and managing the housing down to a reasonable level, so then they can rent that housing to people at a very reasonable rent, and people have security, long-term security. They have certainty in relation to the rent that they're paying. And it works well in that somebody doesn't feel they have to buy a property or own a home because they know they have secure accommodation. Often because of the developments, they can provide community facilities.
And is there a profit motive in that? Like, does the person who's building the property or developing the property, is there a kind of a percentage that he's entitled to earn, or is it government funded social kind of? It's
this cost rental housing. It's either provided by local government, by local authorities, or by limited profit housing associations.
Okay.
So there isn't. It's normally provided by people that aren't profit driven.
So the developer's margin isn't there. So you're essentially talking about a contractor coming in and tendering.
Yes,
but the local authority is the developer. Local
authority or a housing association.
Okay.
And any of the surplus funding, that over time that builds up, that is used as equity as part of the equity in new developments. So it has to be ploughed back in. But they have been able to achieve a constant supply of housing, secure, and people are happy to live there and have good quality of life. In the Austrian situation, a person can actually buy the property if they wish.
Much like our old system of local authority housing.
Yes, but people rarely do because they rent. The rental costs aren't too high,
and if
they want to move,
if you have tenure as well for 20 years or whatever, then why would you buy, in a sense?
Yes, you have that security, and I think that's very important, and that's what we need to introduce in Ireland. That we want to have a secure rental sector where people know they can stay long term, that the rents are reasonable rents, and a lot lower cost than the rents that we have at the moment. As opposed to a sector where you have, maybe a lack of security,
of
and
course,
the rents can vary.
Of course, and then you've got that uncertainty. But one of the questions that in my mind hasn't really been answered about long-term rental or lifetime rental is that I don't think in Ireland that we have provided for an alternative for people who, after retirement age, aren't getting an income in, even if the rents are reasonable. How are they going to be able to pay them? We don't seem to have an alternative income generating asset class for people, so like, for example, if we were in Germany, we would have been encouraged to invest in income generating investments from the time we were in our 20s. So therefore, if we want to rent during retirement, that's okay because we have an income coming in. We don't have that in Ireland. Is there a bit of the jigsaw puzzle missing?
Yes, we do. Pensions are very important. So we need to ensure that if we go down the road of providing cost rental accommodation, that people can afford it. In older age, or that there is some level of state support, for them to
the case
to rent
that
an accommodation.
You need to have kind of like the Australian model where it's a mandatory pension scheme, and so that people don't have this decision, I'm going to spend my money on the holidays, but it's actually taken from the salary and goes into an automatic pension or something like that.
Yes, I mean that's that would be good. The other thing, actually, just going back to when you're providing this largest scale accommodation, and as people get older, they're better able to provide services to those people. So in terms of being able to live at home and live in the community, because they have larger developments that they can provide the support and the services, and ensure, very importantly, as people age, that there's good social interaction. So the pension costs nearly reduce because they're not relying on having to provide high support, housing, or nursing homes for people unnecessarily, because of there's other things that work in the system as well. And one thing, actually, in every development that they do, they have what we might think of a caretaker, but the caretaker is more of a community worker, in that they look after development, but they actually link into everyone. So again, in the Vienna system, they say having that community worker in every development makes a huge difference, and gives people, just a better quality of life.
Yeah, and actually, that's an extremely interesting and important factor when we look at. You recently, or your agency recently, published the housing options for our ageing demographic, and that was another key part of it, as in there's been a lot of talk about people downsizing, particularly to free up larger family homes. And in a way, actually, part of that pressure was quite misconstrued, I think, by the media, that there was pressure being put on downsizers, when in actual fact what we want to do is really provide that people who wish to downsize, when the time comes, that there will be somewhere suitable for them within their own community, and that's such a vital part.
The one thing,
I can't let you go without a word on that.
We've done a couple of pieces of research over the last number of years, particularly, people, do people want to downsize? Do they want that choice? When we dug in deep into that, people, the main wish of people is to stay in their community.
Yes.
And where they have an option to downsize within their community,
They'll take it.
they'll take it. And we do really have to look at our ageing population. Just some statistics for you. In terms of the number of people over 65 will double in the next 30 years. The number of people over 80 will triple over the next 30 years. So we have a huge issue, and we need to ensure that we have appropriate accommodation. People have choice, and most importantly, people want to stay in their community and have that choice. And I know, just personally, that where people have the choice of downsizing or having more appropriate accommodation for them within their community, a lot of people will take up that option.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, and that would be the feedback that we're getting when we've covered this story previously. John, thank you so much for coming in, and maybe you'd come back and talk to us another day about that, because I think that there's so much more work to be done in this area. So that was John O'Connor, Chief Exec of the Housing Agency. Thank you so much for coming in to us, John. After a quick break, we'll be joined by Dr. David Duffy, Director of Property Industry Ireland.
Everything's fine on 93.9 Dublin South FM.
Okay, and welcome back to Property Matters here on Dublin South FM with Gavin Gallagher and myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. As mentioned before the break, we have Dr. David Duffy, Director of Property Industry Ireland here. David, we're delighted to have you here with us today.
It's great to be here, thank you.
So, David, you might just actually explain to people what Property Industry Ireland is and what it does.
Okay, Property Industry Ireland, we're a representative organisation for the sector, and we draw our membership from across the sector. So we've architects, planners, funders, estate agents, contractors, home builders. And in forming policy and making our submissions to government, that means that we can draw on the range of perspectives to get the full view of the different sectors or the different subsectors when we're putting these submissions in,
and the issues
on the different issues, and on the different calls for submissions that the government have put out. So throughout 2018 they would have put out a consultation on apartment standards, on urban design and building height, and in responding to those we were able to talk to the different components of the industry to put together hopefully a comprehensive submission on them. We've been in existence since about 2011, and in 2015 we became a subsector of IBEC.
And 2011, as people will recall, was a very turbulent time.
The deepest, darkest moments of the Dublin Irish recession.
Well, and this is exactly when I think we needed some clear thinking and coming together. So just in terms of the submissions that you guys have been involved with over the last 12 months, is there consensus is probably a strong word, but are you getting a trend or a picture of the market nationally?
Yes, I mean, our members are not only Dublin based but also based nationally. We hold meetings in Cork, Galway and Limerick to get the views of the regions. I mean, generally the feeling is that I suppose there's a lot going on in the market at the moment. There are a lot of issues to cover. Supply is improving, but there's still a way to go, particularly in the regions where in some cases the cost of building a new home is higher than the cost of a second-hand home in the area, which means it isn't viable. So supply continues to be an issue. I heard you on the numbers that we built 18.5 or 18,050 last year, up to maybe 2022. We've just recently done a set of demographic projections using the long run CSO numbers. Depending on what happens to the number of people who want to set up their own household, demand could average somewhere between 30 and 35,000 new household formation each year. So
we're way behind. Yeah.
We're way behind. So absolutely it's improving, and given that back in kind of 10, 11 we were
zero,
zero or 8,000, of which a proportion were self-builds, or one-off housing, that you then We have improved, but there's still a way to go.
More done. Work done, more to do, isn't it?
Well, that touches on the issue that you mentioned earlier, Gavin, about we're talking about demand, and generally when we look at the supply, we see can it match demand? But actually, one of the questions we need to ask, because we know the market, the industry was decimated. Does our industry have the capacity at this point to deliver 30 to 35,000 homes per year?
I think that's a really important issue. Peak to trough in construction employment. Now that's just pure construction, not the broader sector. We saw a fall of about 160,000 in employment. It's come back up, but it's still about 60 or 70,000 below where it was. And other research by the central bank would suggest that there isn't a pool of construction workers out there. A lot of them have emigrated.
Yeah.
But this is a global trend. It's not an Irish trend. This shortage of labour.
Absolutely, but in the Irish context, I suppose previously the unemployment level would have provided a pool. What you see is that unemployment has gone down to about 5.1, 5.2%. So overall, unemployment has come down, but if you look at it in the subsector of construction, there's still a way to go. And I think that is beginning to put some pressure on the sector. We need to look at things like apprenticeships. Is the apprenticeship structure right? But also I think the sector is looking at other ways of delivering housing, or looking to see if other ways can deliver the housing. For example, modular or off-site construction. A different set of skills are provided for that, or required for that. It will provide some of the solution, but we do need to attract more into the sector. I think probably behind that as well, something like Ireland 2040 and the National Development Plan, both of which are long-term plans, are important, because the spending under the National Development Plan will at least go some way to providing a more stable sector, because there's that ongoing annual spend which hopefully will remove some of the volatility that we've seen.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's very much what John O'Connor, the Chief Executive for the Housing Agency, who was just in with us, he was talking about the Vienna model and how they have a consistent level of construction output, which means they have a consistent level of employment within the industry. And he said that it really hasn't moved in decades, in excess of 5% either way. Now that's in stark contrast to in Ireland or what we've seen elsewhere. And I just wonder,
I think it's going to be years until we've recovered from the kind of the trough and the boom that we went through. And the problem is that I think we were probably 10 years in recession, and then suddenly now we're starting to recover from it, but there's such structural imbalance there now that you cannot just recover from that straight away. We have to go a long way back before we can actually start to. I mean, it's funny, we were talking about off-site construction. I was in London last week, and I was speaking to somebody who was saying that there is one of the big builders of houses over there are investing 70 million in a factory that will do off-site, and he says by the time that they're done, they'll be able to produce houses at 10% below what everyone else is doing them at, and make 10% greater profit from it. And it's like a machine. The thing just spits out. So that's the kind of thing. I think it's when you're in this situation in the market the way we are with the imbalance, I think that's when this kind of innovation will actually find a foothold in the market. In the past, you had traditional. Nobody's going to kind of sort of go into something new if they have a traditional method to fall back on. Yeah. But with the imbalances there, I think 10,000 people per year, it's just getting worse.
I think you make a good point. I mean, it is 10 years since the crash, but I think, and we've seen the economy recover, and we're seeing recovery in activity in the property and the construction sector. But a lot of it is addressing the imbalances that emerged, or maybe not even the imbalances, but the legacies from the crash, and it's working through that as well. So part of trying to bring about a more stable and sustainable property sector, which is good for the economy, it's good for everyone, but part of that is dealing with or untangling the legacies of the crash. And back to the resources issue, I mean, it's 10 years, as you say, it's 10 years since the crash. So some of the people who left the the sector when it crashed, they've retrained, they've alternative careers, or they've retired,
or they've moved somewhere and they've created a life there and they're not coming back. It's not a temporary thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think your point is well made about just that time and it being a complex market and the legacies from the crash having to be unravelled.
The only thing I would say is that, I mean, Australia and UK, two places where the Irish market would have moved to, both of them suffering very badly now, so perhaps that'll actually be a catalyst for people returning back home.
Yeah, even if it is, I just wonder, is that the kind of strategy we want to fall back on? Like, surely this is the time now that we encourage the sector to embrace emerging technologies and methods of modern construction. So how are this is obviously something you've identified through your submissions, but how are your members gearing up for that? Are they in a position to embrace modern methods of construction?
I think more and more the member companies are looking at it, and more in the discussions we would have in our various meetings when members come in to discuss things from either technical construction issues, planning issues, finance issues, trends in the market. More and more it's on the alternative solutions, shall we say, be it off-site construction. Are there other things that need to be looked at? Does, again, going back to the resources, the apprenticeship system has served us very well, but does that need to be looked at? Are there changes that can be made to that means that it's more effective? So absolutely, I think given where we're coming from, and we've recovered, activity has increased, but we are beginning to see constraints emerge. I think more and more the sector is looking for and embracing the alternative solutions.
Okay, well, look, that's a positive one to hear anyway, but I just wonder, is it enough? And Gavin, I think that's a really interesting trend you picked up on from that person you were speaking to in London, because what we are seeing, and we're starting to see in Ireland as well, that you have the main contractors who are embracing off-site technologies. They are partnering with or investing in off-site manufacturers so that they'll have this supply. And I naively thought that this was kind of an investment, kind of in profit sharing, and then actually it transpired across the industry that this is actually in order to get access to getting your development first. So actually there's a huge shortage of skilled manufacturers in the Irish and UK market at the moment. So this is why main contractors are actually doing this, in order to guarantee their own supply of materials that they need. I suppose I just can't help but wonder why, particularly in the construction industry, we haven't embraced more robotics on site. You know, why we haven't moved with the technologies that are there.
I think in some instances, while these work in other markets, those markets tend to be larger. They tend to be produced at a time they are building larger scale projects. And in bringing these technologies into the Irish market, there is a scale issue. Okay. That's not to say that they won't work, or ways aren't being explored to make them work. And I think the off-site construction is one where the benefits of it can be seen, and people are aware of the benefits of it, particularly in terms of the timeliness with which housing can be delivered. And I think what members are looking at, would say what my members would be saying, is that they're looking at it, but they're looking to see how they can deliver it in the scale of the Irish market. Okay.
You talked about there the established demand of between 30,000 and 35,000 per annum. Do we have a good sense yet of where that demand is needed? I mean, is it a 50-50 split, 50 inside the Greater Dublin area and 50 outside?
I haven't, in terms of taking the long-term projections are overall national ones. At a regional level, it's more difficult to predict, because you do have things like internal migration flows and that. I suppose looking at the trend internationally, we are seeing more urbanisation. So on the basis of international trends, you're probably looking at the urban centres within Ireland, and then you've got I suppose the plans under Ireland 2040 as well to go in on top of that as well. So it probably is you probably are looking at a more urban society going forward. So I think then the things that are being looked at the moment in terms of height and density, more efficient use of our infrastructure, because if we know that the population is going to grow, we know that the population within the urban centres are going to grow, we don't want a situation whereby the consequence of that is that people have very long commute times from outside the urban centres, Dublin, Cork, Galway or whatever, and that a significant part of their day is spent sitting, in the Dublin case, on the M50, which we all know is
can be terrible.
Traffic levels on that are.
But I know people that are driving to work in Dublin from Drogheda and from Dundalk and stuff. It's like
absolutely. You hear those stories. I know people who come up from Carlow. I mean, on a daily basis. If we do know that the trend is towards urbanisation, I think we do know then that, or we should at least be planning for height, density, and a better use of our infrastructure, so you move away from that situation of very long commute times.
Okay, but if we're just
making the city denser. I mean, a smaller footprint, taller, is far better than spread out kind of for hundreds.
Yes, and if you look at the international examples, taller does not necessarily mean, or taller and higher density does not necessarily mean skyscrapers. Paris, quite a high density there, but it's not there are parts of it, but it's not a very tall city overall. So I think that we can look at delivering higher density without necessarily going very, very high.
But if you look at Paris as an example, I mean, around here we're talking about 8 stories being, the odd building will be 8 stories. But if you look at Paris, you walk the streets of Paris, the minimum height is about 6 stories for every single of those old buildings across the entire city. And we think 6 stories is like an exceptional height building in this city.
And I think that's hopefully something that the guidelines and the apartment heights or the building height and densities will address the fact that and
it was a great win that
absolutely, and in the context of the Ireland 2040 plan and that plan to grow some of the urban centres, I think we need to be looking at things like that so that you're not bringing about excessive commuting with that as well.
Yeah, what you're saying makes sense, David, but one of the concerns I have, we talk about the need to concentrate on the urban areas, but do we still have an issue in terms of viability outside the Greater Dublin area and Cork? Like when we look at, say, urban centres like Kilkenny, Limerick, how are your clients finding?
In some of those areas it's still a challenge, I think it is important that if we are putting together policies that they do recognise that what you need for an urban environment is very different to what you need for a rural environment. In kind of harking back to what you were talking about earlier on, I mean, we need to develop a rental sector. The investment in the rental sector, for many of the large investors, it's only the urban centres that will be attractive. So we need to ensure that the small scale landlord who provides a lot of the rental properties in rural and regional Ireland doesn't continue to leave the market, because they're the ones who are supplying the rental accommodation for the FDI that's coming into Kilkenny, the FDI that's coming into other centres. So I completely agree with you that policies need to recognise both the urban and the rural or regional dimension. Yeah,
David, just before I let you go, and Gavin here, just earlier today I met with a lady who told me about a bachelor uncle of hers who has 4 properties, all inherited. So he has his own that he lives in. He's got 3 properties, and some of them he's had for up to 20 years. 3 of his 4 homes are vacant, and he will not rent them out because he doesn't want to become a landlord or to have to engage, and his perception is that the tax he would pay just doesn't make it worth his while to go into that burdensome legislative state of being a landlord. So how do we now, maybe that's an extreme example, maybe it's not, but how do we reconcile with the shortage we have now and people who are essentially fearful of our owners of our own landlord responsibilities, which, by the way, obviously it should be heavily regulated.
The tax system is a big problem here because, I mean, our business held a number of apartments for several years, and it was actually costing us money at the end of the day. It wasn't worth our while.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. We did some work on this, and the tax on your rental income is such that it's, in many cases, it's prohibitive, and we've seen that in terms of the number of landlords. Data
you can't offset your debt either, and then your costs of management and all this kind of stuff.
So data from the Residential Tenancies Board show that the number of landlords is declining, and we need to halt that, because we need everybody's talking about having a well-developed rental sector, and this is one of the barriers to it.
Okay, has there been a Property Industry Ireland submission on that?
On the rental sector, absolutely. We did a report on the tax treatment of rental income and sent it in, and we include those kind of suggestions in our pre-budget submission, because we do recognise that you do need a rental sector that is attractive to both landlords and to tenants.
Absolutely. Okay, that was Dr. David Duffy, Director of Property Industry Ireland. Thank you for joining us today, David. Stay tuned after the break, as we'll be hearing from Mihai Penica, Head of Software at Standard Access.
Everything's fine on 93.9 Dublin South FM.
Okay, and welcome back to Property Matters here on Dublin South FM with Gavin Gallagher and myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Our next guest is Mihai Penica, Head of Software of Standard Access. So thank you for joining us here, Mihai. You might just explain to people what Standard Access is.
Well, Standard Access is a startup that we like to believe that we have reinvented the key. Basically, we are using encrypted sound to open doors.
Okay.
So, these days technology is nothing new in the property sector, but the way we are building it is something new.
Excellent. Can you explain to somebody like me who isn't familiar, why is sound encryption better than, say, Bluetooth or say, like our key cards we're used to using in hotels?
Or QR codes or...
Yeah.
Well, sound is not something new. Sound has been used since like late 70s. Like for the first dial-up modems used sound to communicate. So we just took that sound and reinvented it somehow, because these days, in order to open a door, to open a smart lock, you'll be needing like a Bluetooth, you'll be needing like an NFC. But you know that like 6% of all the smartphones these days has an NFC. But all the phones these days have sound. Every phone has a microphone.
That's a good point.
And a speaker. So this way we can be sure that our technology is going to work with any kind of device, any kind of phone. Even with let's say a smartwatch, we can have an app on the smartwatch, and you can use the smartwatch to generate a sound and open the door.
So you don't even need your phone; you just go with your smartwatch and open the door.
Yeah, if it has a speaker.
It can be done.
As
when you say near field, we should just explain that's near field communication.
NFC, near field communication.
Do you want to explain what that is?
Well, Mihai, we have an expert here. Let him.
Well, near field communication basically, when you're approaching a device that has a reader, your phone is activated, or well, NFC is not only used in phones. It's used like cards or dongles or whatever. So basically, when you approach the lock or the door, a pulse is sent to the device and activates the NFC and sends the data to that door, and recognize the user and opens the door if it's the case, Our technology does something similar, but using sound, So basically, when you approach the door and you want to open the door, you just press a button. An encrypted sound, it's been issued. The door, the IoT device that is installed on the door, picks up the sound, decrypts it, and then if the user has access, it allows the door to be opened.
Okay, so that's an important point, if the user has access. So this is used to restrict some access and allow others. So again, a little bit like if we were in a co-working space.
That's where it's perfect. It's funny, I had this discussion with Damien in the past, and
that's Damien Brown's.
Damien Brown is our CEO.
You're the CEO of Standard Access,
and that was one of the big issues, is that if you go to, say, a co-working place, they've got meeting rooms that you can hire by the hour, and the problem is that usually they're unlocked, so people kind of go in and just use them when they're not in use. And so the guys that own the co-working place weren't actually monetizing those people that were kind of running in and jumping in and using the meeting in an ad hoc kind of basis. So the doors are locked and you have it on your phone, so you can basically just go up and open it. As soon as it's opened, and now it's billing. So straight, you're monetizing, and you can kind of do it on an almost minute by minute basis rather than 1 hour, of a block payment. It means that you can actually have very small, go in for a phone call, come out or whatever, and that kind of thing.
Is this technology being used in East Point Business Park, Gavin?
It's something we're looking at. Where, it's funny, it's interesting to know about the sonic sort of solutions, because we have been approached a number of times by guys offering QR codes on the phone, so you go up and you wave your phone and it opens doors and things like that. So there's a number of different solutions on the market now, and but the sonic one I think is more secure or something like that. I remember
it's more secure because every time you are trying to open the door, basically a new sound it's generated. Everything is encrypted, even the frequencies are changed. So basically that's very secure technology. Even if someone tries to, let's say, to record the sound, it's not going to work the second time.
Yeah,
exactly. And another thing that we have implemented in our apps is like you can share the keys using WhatsApp.
Yeah.
So basically, you can go into the app and say, okay, I want this guy to have access for one time between these hours.
Yes,
and that key is going to be valid only that time.
I remember when I looked at near field communications in the past, I had a retail centre that and we were looking at actually installing these readers, so you could actually tell from the footfall if somebody was walking through and they had, for example, a little key tag or key ring for your, and you'd have a near field thing inside that, so if they passed a certain point, it would alert us that one of our loyal customers is back again. And you could actually, so for example, a lady sitting in a shop waiting for a customer, the customer walks in and suddenly on their screen it's saying, okay, here's Carol. Carol was here last Saturday and she bought the following dress. And this way you're able to engage with the person and kind of sort of have this conversation. Oh, how did you find that handbag you bought or whatever? And it's kind of this data that people really like.
For personal service as well, yeah.
Yeah, basically, someone said that information today is power. So this is what we want to do. Basically, if you have data and you have the information, you can take this decision on a higher level.
Yes.
You can know exactly what to do. You can administer spaces. You can know exactly what tenant behavior or things like that.
Okay, where is this technology being used at the moment?
We are going to have our first install in London next month. So
and what kind of building is that?
It's apartment building. We had also a few installs in Ireland, so the technology it's in use right now. Also, a thing is that a feature that we have implemented in our technology is like, let's say, for example, you have a problem with a plumbing, so you can take a photo of the plumbing, and send it directly to the landlord. We have an in-chat app that can create a ticket. Okay. So the landlord will see the building administrator will see the problem there and will assign it to a technical guy. I mean, a plumbing guy, whatever.
So you're integrating with
exactly
other service providers.
So meanwhile the task it's open. A key is issued to this guy, so he can go in, fix the problem, and then when the problem is fixed, goes out, the key is revoked.
Yeah.
So it's actually allowing you to make an alert, or it's allowing you to actually register a fault or a maintenance issue.
Exactly.
And send it, and that's what triggers instructions to somebody for
like a plumber.
Maintenance.
Exactly, like a plumber.
And they actually have access to, so there's no getting property managers in and trying to arrange things like that.
Nothing like that.
It's brilliant. Yeah.
That's good. That's a good end to end.
And the best part of this is that everything is done in real time. So basically, everything, if it's done very fast, and the tenant can follow the everything that's happening on the app. I mean, and the problem is fixed, the key is
Real time.
revoked. Everything, like
Real
everything is
time,
done.
real time information.
You said something earlier that just caught my attention as well there, that actually you can pick up on maybe user trends. So actually by following the data, by following where they're going, what they're doing, what kind of trends are you?
Well, we are not spying on users. That's what you want to say.
It's a dirty word
Okay.
nowadays.
No, I'm interested in the trends. So, for example, we have, down in Cork, Ireland's smartest building. And it was really interesting what they were finding, as in how many people were actually leaving their offices to go for lunch, which was a shockingly low number. So that actually triggered things like wellness talks at lunchtime. So there's something where monitoring users' behaviours to identify trends that aren't about the individuals. These are trends for all of the users in a workspace. They were actually able to identify an issue, which was people weren't taking their lunch, or they weren't going outside, or they weren't getting fresh air or exercise. And so they brought in-house wellness sessions at lunchtime, which I thought was phenomenal. So there are lots of ways that this data can be used to improve the overall service. This is all coming back to this. Anthony Slumbers will be proud of us. Space as a service.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the direction that real estate is going, and this is just another way to feed into this.
It's so true.
And not only that, a big problem these days is sub-renting, for example. Okay, using this technology, the system will pop out an alert if something is wrong with access in that flat or whatever. So basically, the data can be used in a lot of ways. We are not, like I said, we are respecting everything like the GDPR and everything, because everything is encrypted and can be used. That data can be decrypted only by the user.
Yes, yeah.
So basically we are just getting statistics from the doors, and with those statistics we can give away to the landlord to improve the services to the tenants.
Okay.
I had lunch today with an executive who works at one of the banks, and he was explaining that they did an internal audit and they discovered that at 70 out of every 100 seats, there's 30 seats that are not in use at any one time in the building. So they go out and they hire 100,000.
And are these people in the bank? So everybody would have their own desk as such?
These would be people that are on holiday, out sick, going to meetings, away, travelling, whatever. So there's 30 seats out of every 100 are not in use. So they're starting to look now at this model and saying, well, why don't we reduce this, and we can have a situation where instead of hiring a 100,000 square foot office for your 100 staff, you actually get 70,000 square foot, and then your 100 staff they occupy a WeWork when they need
almost hot desking.
It's
exactly
they're because the software is now able to tell that these guys are going to be away, and so this desk is for this chap, and then next week it's going to be for that chap.
Well, just as an side note here, we recently relocated to offices out in City West, and all of our technology systems are not up and running. So we actually have a system where it's a little bit like the Hunger Games for first in, best dressed. So first in gets the best desk and the best connection.
That's the way it should be, by the way.
It does motivate you to get to the office early.
I was in London. I was working in a co-working place for a couple of months, and when I was there, it was exactly like that. The first person in the morning got the nice desk, could stay there for the whole day, and then you'd have people coming in at 10 o'clock and they'd have to kind of sit with the laptop on their knee, kind of working away.
To be honest, I want my bank officials to be nice and pleasant and happy in their day, so I think we're going to need to maybe motivate them a little bit more. But Mihai, you might tell us some of the other potential uses for the technology, because co-working seems like an ideal space, as with residential, but in Ireland we're seeing the rise of co-living spaces. Now that's really a step up from co-working, because you're talking about the places where people sleep and then they come back to communal areas to be sociable or to prepare food or whatever it is. So
I think it's the marriage of the two, actually, is the thing. It's because you can work in the building and you can live upstairs, and then you don't have commute times. So now, instead of spending even 10 minutes driving your car or cycling your bike, you can spend those 10 minutes in a communal space where you're actually interacting with the people.
Then we'll have to start doing yoga on the stairwells. Yeah.
Yoga on the stairwells. Well, you can do Stairmaster classes,
Yeah, but so that's another potential use case.
That's another potential use case. Yeah.
Student accommodation, I presume, is going to be a big one for you.
Exactly, because basically, we're getting back to the data analytics. Basically knowing exactly the tenant behavior, you can take decision if that space it's well used or it should be replaced with something else.
Okay.
So using our platform, you can have access to this information and take decision based on that.
And so it's any smartphone that your technology works on?
Any phone, doesn't have to be a smartphone.
Okay.
Any phone at all. Any phone that has a speaker, like I said.
Because I know from we were talking about student housing there, and I worked with the chap who was managing UCD's accommodation. So they have 2,000 or 3,000 beds there, and every year they would have to go off and get hundreds of these little tags to kind of open up the doors, and if somebody loses it, that's it, it's gone. Whereas with a phone,
you'll never lose it. And another thing is that our app has the solution we've developed basically uses the phone's hardware to encrypt data. So basically, if it's not going to be able to you are not going to be able to use it without your phone. So it's also identified that it's you who's going to open the door.
Yes.
I love the concept of standard access reinventing the key.
Yeah. Okay, that was Mihai Penica, head of software at Standard Access. Mihai, thank you very much for being on Property Matters.
Thank you.
And that's it from us in the studio today. Thank you for joining us on Property Matters, the show where property matters. Get in touch with the show by emailing hello@iPropertyRadio.com.
Okay, we want to thank all of our guests for being on the show with us today. Next week we have a guest coming all the way from New York. That's Aaron Block, co-founder and managing partner of Metaprop, a VC proptech fund, and he's going to be discussing his new book, PropTech 101. We'll also be joined by Wicklow and Wexford-based estate agent Michael Kinsella of Kinsella Estates, and he's going to talk to us about the market outside of Dublin. But for now, thanks to Shane Flynn, who was on sound, producer Katie Tallon, her assistant for the day Ben Dempsey, and of course thank you so much Gavin for filling in.
No problem.
We are back at the same time next week. Stay tuned for Bowl of Soul, which is coming up next. From Gavin and myself, Carol Tallon, have a good week.
Thank you.